So you're joining me on the Grand Canal just past Ballycommon. The plan today is to cycle all the way along the canal as far as possible to Mullingar. Well, actually, the canal doesn't go to Mullingar, it goes below Mullingar, but I'm then going to swing up to Mullingar and then come back in along the Royal Canal. Neither of the canals have complete routes that you can follow. The Royal Canal does all the way from the Shannon to at least Maynooth now. I think it may be a little bit further, but it's still not complete all the way into Dublin. The Grand Canal, as far as I can make out, is a lot more bitty. This section here, absolutely perfect cycleway. I've cycled it before for quite a few kilometres, but then there's sections that, as far as I know, there's only grass. It is a long distance walking route, but I'm also not sure how easy, I'm going to try and get the bike onto the grass and cycle it, but how easy that will be. It could be that the gates will be too small, so we'll see. But yeah, bit of an adventure. Weather forecast is good. I'd probably camp somewhere around Mullingar, either on one of the lakes or on one of the canals, depending on how far I get. I brought a spare battery with me, but no charger this time. The distance is 220 kilometers, so that's kind of interesting because there's a theoretical possibility I don't have enough power with me. I'm pretty sure I do. I've enough experience with them to be confident, because it's not like there's going to be any big hills, or if there are, it'll be a big surprise. But yeah, we'll see how that gets on, and I'll run this in time lapse, so we should hopefully get the entire journey. If you're new to the channel, I've a lot of content which is me bike packing the Irish coastline and the Scottish Islands and Highlands. Sounds interesting to you? Probably a good moment to hit subscribe. But today we're off to on the Grand Canal and then swinging up west of Lough Ennell to reach the Royal Canal west of Mullingar, through Mullingar and back down the Royal Canal all the way to Dublin. I'm cycling a rally motorist tour. You'll find a review of it there on the top right. And as I said, I'm bringing two 500 watt batteries with me, which I'm very sure will get me the 220 kilometers or so. It's been my intention to try this route going out one canal and back on the other for a while, but it did strike me that if anyone in Dublin is interested in getting into bike packing, this is a very good route to start yourself off on. As I knew I'd be facing multiple hard to pass gates on the Grand Canal part of the route, I made the decision to leave one of my panniers at home and carry more stuff on the bike in the hope I'd be able to squeeze through more of them. Here we're reaching what will be the first impassable instruction. As I cycle up this side, a guy on the other side shouts at me and tells me I won't be able to get through, so I come back down. We're going to see him chatting to me in a minute. And then I go up this side. Initially this looks a lot better. However, if you look ahead, we've got two gates coming up, and the second of the two is going to be impassable. So there's the first one, but then this one, there's just no way of squeezing the bike through. Alright, so I just hit the first bit that's not passable on a touring bike. That gate behind me, it's not enough room to get the pedals through. So the only way to get past it will be to lift the entire bike over the gate, which with my rig, I mean, without unloading everything and loading it back on again, the other side's not particularly practical. So I'm not going to go that far. The bike's too heavy to lift safely over the gate. I was having to go, and then I thought, no, this is stupid, I'll just do me back in. So this is the first diversion to make the way around at about 9 kilometers, I think. So actually I'd have been better sticking with my standard 2 pannier load, because then I could have taken both panniers off, which would have made the bike lighter, and I might then have been able to lift it over some of these obstacles. I'm still not sure how smart that would be, because it still weighs about 20 kilograms, so you might do yourself injury or worse still, damage the bike. So here I'm taking the Adamstown road. then turning onto the Peamount Road, where I had quite a big truck passing me, as you'll see, and then finally turning onto the Lough Road, which is going to bring me down to the canal again at Hazel Hatch Bridge, and then we'll be back en route, more or less. I've had a few encounters with very large trucks on the Peamount Road before heading down towards Naas, in fact. So I think it's probably a route that is used by trucks quite often because there's a few industrial estates and factories just off it. So you might want to keep that in mind. So that was my first impassable bit back there. If I'd a lighter bike, I could have lifted it over the barrier, but there wasn't really any safe way to lift a fully loaded bike over. I'm back on the canal again though at Hazel Hatch Bridge. Haven't been out here in a while, so it's interesting that there's obviously a lot of people now living in boats along this stretch. But yeah, hopefully I'll manage to stay on the route for a while. There is another diversion coming up, I can see, and seeing as that one wasn't even marked as a diversion, I'll see what I hit in another few kilometres. So we've a long stretch now running from Hazel Hatch through Sallins up to Ticknevin, where I managed to stay almost always either on the canal or beside the canal. There was one nasty obstacle coming up, which we'll see just as we got into Sallins. Some of this route is still under construction. I'll talk about that as we go along the route, and that hopefully the bad obstacle I hit will be removed. Some of it turns out to be pretty rough grass track, although for that section on the other side of Sallins I could have actually taken the road there. And the only bit that's truly impassable is once I get to Ticknevin, and then I've to do a bit of a loop coming back on a bit after Edenderry, although as I explain, I think I probably could have come back on at Edenderry itself or shortly afterwards. And then from Edenderry I actually also managed to stay on the canal all the way to my turning off point. So yeah, overall, in fact, it turns out that most of the Grand Canal is very cyclable, if not on it, at least beside it for most of the length. There are a couple of diversions. Mostly the traffic isn't too bad on those. In more welcome news, my map has this section here from Ponsonby Bridge onwards marked as impassable with a big detour, but actually there's a sign at the entrance apologising for work being done, but it appears today at least it's pretty near complete. So we shall see if I get 3/4 of the way up and then it just runs out, but hopefully I'll be able to get through in this bit. And probably fair to remind you again that this section is work in progress. It could well be finished off quite in the relatively near future, in which case you shouldn't hit the problems I'm going to hit here. And you know, in fairness, the rough track is quite excusable in that context of the work actually being done. It's just this particular stretch I'm on now, which actually is quite nice and smooth, is the bit they finished off. And then when I come on to the rough track in a moment, you know, you can tell that it well, I could tell cycling on it that basically the stones had been put down, it had been lightly rolled, but it hadn't yet received its serious rolling. But here's what I had to say on the day. So I'm now on the section between Devonshire Bridge and Sallins, and as you can probably tell from the sound and the bobbing, this is pretty rough. It's kind of gravel with a finer layer of gravel on it, but hasn't really been rolled, and in sections, as you can tell, it's really it's pinging me all over the place. I think I've 32mm tires, so on those it's okay. It would be brutal on a road bike, so yeah, probably wouldn't want to be doing it on a road bike. But yeah, it is a whole section that my routing thing thought was actually impassable, and instead half it now has a fairly good surface, not completely finished, it's not completely compacted, but it's almost finished. And then half of it, I'm presuming this does go all the way to Sallins, is this rougher large gravelly surface. But if you've any, you know, providing you don't have super skinny tyres, you can probably do it. I'll just give you a look at it. So fairly rough going, but as you'll see in a moment as I'm coming along here, we start to get to the bit that's very obviously under construction. You know, you've still got the sheds and things there, and there's a diversion away from the riverbank that's going to lead me up to a gate that turns out to be pretty impassable and a bit of an issue for me. And so here we have exactly the sort of disaster I fear. After cycling a long way up a rough gravel track, I find this gate that there's no way I'm going to squeeze the bike through. I'm going to try and see if I can get it over by the wall. I've dropped a bag over, but yeah, really bad planning here. Grand.
On a hander?
Yeah, it'd be great if you get the front of it.
Yeah.
It's not easy to get through. No, it is not. It's a long way back. Thanks very much. So, that guy hadn't come along and helped me. I probably got it through, but that's a pretty narrow ledge. Probably a reasonable chance of me falling with 25 kilos probably of weight. Potentially landing on top of me, so yeah, not great. Definitely. Now it says it's under construction, so hopefully they'll improve it, but it's got the signs about bikes, motorbikes that is, and it's a big problem. Council's putting in, and I guess waterways on too, putting in barriers that are in excluding motorbikes also exclude cyclists, particularly anybody with a non-standard bike, trikes, mobility bikes, touring bikes, any of those, so not great. Once over that gate, it was a short ride onwards to the pretty little town of Sallins, where it was a good time to stop and have a well-deserved lunch break at the 13th Lough Gastro Bar, where I'd burger, chips and a pint, and that got me set for the afternoon and onwards. So on leaving Sallins, what I did was I took the right-hand canal bank route. Now initially that's a good track as we're seeing here, but then it's going to degrade to basically a rough track, then a grass track, and also have a couple of quite difficult to pass gates. For a lot of this length there is a good road on the other side. However, to get onto it you have to do a loop around Sallins basically and then come back onto it. So I think on balance you'd probably be better off doing what I did as far as Digby Bridge anyway, because the other way it's a bit of a long loop, and while bits of this particular track are kind of rough, and as we'll see in a minute, you know, turns into grass, it's probably better than having to do that road loop. That was the River Liffey flowing under the canal, by the way. I think we often fail to appreciate just what an engineering marvel both the canals were, entirely man-made, and both of them at various places cross major enough rivers. The Royal Canal crossing the Boyne, also on an aqueduct. As you can see here, the track's getting rougher and we're about to hit this gate, which I got through, but I left the camera running and you can see me struggling here, having to lift it up, the handlebars, to get back out and over the top. But we did it and we're getting on the way again. There's a curious concentric stone circles feature here that's marked on the maps but not labelled. Anyone know what this actually does? I think it must take water. And that gets us on the last bit of the run to Digby Bridge. As I said, quite a difficult stretch, and we do have yet another gate here. A little bit of a struggle getting it over. And a little bit of map checking as I'm trying to work where I am and what the best route. Coming to another awkward gate, and then seeing that the track ahead is rather narrow grass. And I think, what will I do? Sure, I'll go for it. So again, this is a pretty rough track. You're trying to cycle in that rut. Now this terrain is very pretty, but I was making pretty poor speed on it, so I was getting worried, and then much to my delight, it turns back into a really decent road. That was getting me quite optimistic, but unfortunately just around the corner is another one of these gates, and this one I unfortunately couldn't find a way over. And here we have another one. Now this one's essentially impassable because my handlebars won't fit through. So in order to get the bike over it, I'd have to lift it up a good 1.5 meters to get that up, which would be pretty tricky with that bike. It's pretty heavy. I mean, I could do it, but the odds of me spraining something are reasonable. That gate's particularly annoying as obviously it would be quite fixable, but it basically meant that I was going to have to take another road detour, a relatively short one thankfully, towards Prosperous, and then across and then back down to attempt the canal again at the next bridge. Now unfortunately that was also going to be a little disappointing, because basically I got there and went onto the canal track and then quickly discovered that in fact it was not suitable as well. So basically that's me doing a loop and heading back to the road again, and again a relatively short detour that's now going to bring us onto a road that runs right alongside the canal for quite some distance. So that wasn't, you know, I mean, these are quiet enough roads. There's a little bit of traffic on them, but I've certainly cycled on worse, so it's not the end of the world. We come back onto the canal again briefly at Robertstown, but here, in fact, there's quite a lot of complex stuff happening with the water, and the Barrow is forking off to one side. So in fact, we're going parallel to the Barrow and then crossing back over to contact with the Grand Canal again. This time when we catch the Grand Canal, we're going to have a long section where we're going to be following it on a road that runs parallel to it. Kind of until we get to Edenderry, this will be the last major diversion we have to take. You know, again, I prefer to avoid the roads, but they're not among the worst roads I've ever cycled on. You know, we get back to the canal here in a moment. Although I must say, this is taking... here we go. I was just going, this is taking longer than I remembered. The road itself, as I said, quiet, only a couple of vans passing me, pretty pleasant period of cycling, and it's going to continue like this basically all the way to Ticknevin, although in fact from Abbey Lock Bridge there is a patch of quite rough gravel with a couple of height barriers on them. They're quite curiously low height barriers. You kind of almost have to duck when you're cycling a bicycle underneath them, but that gets us down to Ticknevin, where, as we'll see, there's the first of those barriers. I'm going to have to make a bit of a detour after going down a dead end. The bit past the dead end, I think, actually is genuinely quite swampy, and the bank is broken down in places, but there's also locked farmers' gates and things in the way. So that was probably the kind of most impassable looking bit I was to reach. This bit is very, very potholed. I was trying to dodge in and out of them and hope I didn't actually break anything, but yeah, we're going to get through that and back on the route soon enough. This stretch was also one of a few segments of the journey where I passed a number of men fishing recreationally along the sides of the canals. I wonder if you actually managed to catch much in there. In the way back in the Royal Canal on the Sunday morning, in fact, I spotted a few people that had obviously been camping out as well by it. But yeah, so there's a kind of wide range of recreational uses the canals get involved in, and it's all a bit ad hoc. The main thing I took from the journey along the Grand Canal is it wouldn't take that much work to turn this into a much more passable route, and you'd probably pull in a lot of tourism for small towns that could do it as an additional source of revenue. Anyway, here's the dead end bit coming up. This looks initially pretty promising, but the road's about to run out. And in fact, what I didn't realise here is I've just gone through a gate that is normally locked. So I've basically backtracked and I I park my bike, I cross this on foot because I want to see if I lug the bike across the lock gate. Is there a way through on the other side? I decide there isn't, so I'm coming out, and that's the farmer who just locked the gate and fortunately also unlocked it for me. So I didn't get stuck and I could trail him back out. Like a lot of the land along the canal is obviously agricultural, and the canal itself seems to get used a little bit in both cases for watering cattle and things, but also obviously as a route for tractors, and for, I would presume at certain times you'd also find cattle being driven up and down, so something else to keep in mind. Anyway, this is the end of the dead end, and I'm now on the diversion, which is going to take me up towards and then around Edenderry. Now, as we'll see, this diversion had some rather peculiar aspects to it. One thing to note actually about this stretch is that there's kind of scrubland wood on either side of the road, and parts which I suspect might be abandoned, not very economical fields, but I definitely had the impression that it's another spot you'd probably get away with while camping if you were quiet about it over the night. This road itself is quiet enough, but the road we're going to join in a few minutes is a fair bit busier, but we'll get to that shortly. And then I'll tell you all about the weird thing that happened next. Pick up the narration then, but for now, here's Lotus Pond by Akashish Gandhi to take us through to the next part. And so swinging around the back of Edenderry, here's where things are about to get interesting, because I'm looking for a small road. I've just missed it, so I've turned back because I thought I spotted a laneway, and I thought, God, it can't be this laneway, can it? And apparently, yep, that's what the map's telling me. So heading down the laneway, looking at the grass growing in the middle. Now, I've done a fair bit of this in Western Ireland, so I was thinking maybe it's just another lane, but then it goes into an actual farmyard. Have a chat with the farmer. It's a sat-nav error. He tells me I can get out through his front gate, basically, so that saves me having to backtrack, and I'm back on my road again. But don't follow this route, it's the wrong way to go. You're probably better off going into the centre of Edenderry and checking to see if you can rejoin the canal at that point. If not, you're going to be able to join it at the next bridge down, which is where I'm heading to. When I got to this bridge though, and I looked back the other way, I could see there was a proper surface running in the opposite direction, so I don't know where that surface starts, but it may well start in Edenderry itself. So we've come back on here at Cartland Bridge, just past Edenderry, and in fact there's going to be a really good high quality cycle track all the way down to Ballycommon, which is where I'm going to be coming off and then basically heading directly north along Lough Ennell to the place I'm going to camp, and then the following day heading to Mullingar to link up with the Royal Canal. But yeah, this section really good, an example of what could be done hopefully for the entire length of the canal. It would be really remarkable if both canals had this sort of quality surface all the way out to the Shannon and then all the way back. I mean, you'd basically have a I think it would be about 320 or 330 kilometres round trip that could be done, and I mean you could run an awful lot of tourist infrastructure off the back of that between cyclists and hikers, both of which tend to be both thirsty and hungry, and on a route that size of course also in need of accommodation. It's probably a good point to mention that currently the bylaws allow you to camp on either of the canals for a period up to a week. However, they're in the process of changing those, and they're removing that right to camp entirely, and will basically just say that camping is forbidden. Well, I'm back on some pretty decent cycle paths by the canal coming out of Edenderry. I had a weird diversion around Edenderry. There's an impassable bit coming into it. But the weird thing was, it sent me up a local road that increasingly looked like a farm track, and then that indeed ran through the yard of a farm with the gate. I talked to, I presume, the farmer who was outside his car. He said it happened a lot, but it was okay if I went through, so I didn't have to divert back. But once you come down the other side of that and back onto the canal, there's a decent cycle path. Now, looking back in the other direction, I think that cycle path might have started in Edenderry, so if I hadn't, I kind of did a loop around it. If I instead had got into the centre, I'd probably have picked it up there. But anyway, I'll try and adjust the final version of the cycle route so you don't also go to the farmer's yard. A bit of repetition for emphasis there. Definitely not that I'd forgotten I'd recorded that on the route. Anyway, that's the advice. Try and avoid the farmer's yard. So on the bylaw changes, I strongly suspect this is an anti-unhoused people measure. Basically, they want to stop homeless encampments on the canals, which has been something that's happened in Dublin, and indeed a man was almost killed and left with life-changing injuries. I think amputations after his tent was removed with a JCB, or a backhoe as an American would say, and so the kind of universal ban on camping is probably a side effect of that. So that's not great, to put it mildly. I suspect, because it probably is just directed at homeless people, that what will happen is it will only be enforced in the areas around cities. And probably if you're, well, I mean, to be honest, are they going to employ people to go down the camps down the canals at 8 o'clock every evening looking for people camping 5 or 10 kilometres from the nearest village? No, they're not. Same situation with most wild camping in Ireland, to be honest. There's no camping signs all over the place, but if you set up at dusk and you move on by dawn, generally nobody's going to say boo to you. But yeah, I think that's a real shame, and it's kind of typical of the poor attitude of official Ireland towards people enjoying the outdoors in a way that doesn't involve spending money. That said, this is me stopping in Daingean, where I am indeed going to be spending some money. It's getting fairly late, about 5:30, and I've decided it's a good time to have a break for a pint, which I had it in the Grove, and then popping across the road to Amigo's Chipper for a curry chips. So as I'm waiting for my curry chips and battered sausage, I forgot that the first time in the takeaway, I think it's a good idea to check the weather and also what time sunset is at. And I'm rather horrified to realise that it's in an hour and 20 minutes and I've got over 25 kilometres to go. Oops! This is an old trick of mine, and I'll talk about it in a minute, live from the actual scene. So I'm going to Ballycommon, which is this stretch of the canal here. The path, the good track does seem to continue on the other side, but that's as far as I'm going, because now I'm going to be swinging north to make that connection to the Royal Canal. It's about 35 kilometres to the Royal Canal at this point, up the back of Lough Ennell. But I'm not doing all that 35. This evening I'm doing about 25, and I'm basically aiming for the Jonathan Swift Park, which is at the base of Lough Ennell. I've done my usual scouting via Google Satellite View, and it looks like somewhere I might get away with that kind of dusk to dawn camping. So that's my common standard when I'm doing cycling, because you know, the distances you cover are somewhat limited, so the number of places you can stop are somewhat limited, and you can't always get a perfect spot. That particular park, there is a fair amount of commercial activity operates out of it. There's a kayaking club, there's boat hires, there's stuff like that. So from that point of view, I don't want to be hanging around bothering people during the day. But you know, as I said, generally you arrive set up around dusk, you're gone soon after dawn, and you're probably not even seen by anybody. And if you are, they're probably not that bothered. But now I'm racing through the hills, and this bit of the route is the one bit where there are some hills. They're quite nice hills, actually. They're kind of nice inclines and declines, and it's pretty interesting countryside. There's not that much traffic gone under the motorway there. And lots of agriculture going on both sides. So again, I think this, you know, if you want to try a bit of bike packing, this route isn't the worst by any means. You might want to be a bit less ambitious in distance and actually camp on the Grand Canal and the Royal Canal, turn it into a 2-night trip. But anyway, it's getting late, the sun is setting, and I decided it's time to say another piece to camera about my current situation and how do I keep finding myself here. And I have somehow managed to once more get myself in my traditional racing for the sunset situation. Sunset is in, I think, about 20 minutes, and I'm heading for the lake. I'm planning to camp. I think, I'm not exactly sure how far away it is, but I'm just hoping the location is actually suitable, because that's the big risk here. I haven't been there before, so if I arrive and it's not, I'm going to be a little bit fucked, because it's going to be dark and I'm going to be camping in a gateway or something, so hopefully that'll be alright. So as the sun sets, I find myself getting to Castletown Geoghegan. I suspect you might get away with wild camping dusk to dawn again by the river there. It's another potential stop. Yep, I'm kind of at this stage going, I better get here soon, because the light really is starting to die. I'm not even daring to stop to look at my map to work out how close I've got. And it's this final long straight shoot up towards it, and I am indeed getting near. And in fact, as I'm going through this stretch here now, I'm noticing there's some small woodland scrub on either side that's got that sort of standard quilted gate barrier, so it's probably also an alternate camping spot. This is the actual park itself I'm going into. There's quite a lot of activity going on still, for boats and things, so you know, that's the thing, people do that until dusk. I decide I'm not going to camp in the actual main car park on the grass. There are a couple of camper vans there, but it just looks like there's going to be too many people coming. I try this muddy laneway down the back and then decide, no, that's not going to work out either. So I ended up very tucked away in the woods, which are just south of the secondary car park, pretty much invisible in there. Managed to put the tent up in the dark, broke out my now cold battered sausage and curry chips with a glass of wine. And you know, the thing is, if you've done 120k cycling, you're pretty hungry, and even that tastes pretty good. Then next morning it's up at dawn and taking the tent down. I also decided to film this because I love my tent, and I got really skilled at packing it away. I mean, I put this up the previous night in pretty much pitch blackness with just a little bit of moonlight through the trees to light it. A very misty morning indeed, and an early set out. So I'm leaving Jonathan Swift Park, where I camped in the woods overnight. It actually has a toilet that stays open, so it's always a good surprise first thing in the morning when there's a toilet available. It's funny how small things become big. I have a bit of a problem in that I brought the wrong cable for my iPhone, so I can't charge it, and I've currently got 20% charge. I figure if I get to Mullingar, I have a good chance of being able to buy a replacement cable or another cable, and even if I can't, I just then follow the canal to Dublin, so it should be okay. But I should have double checked as I was packing things. Dear oh dear. Yeah, so that's it. I'm going to stop and put on my high vis here before I hit the road, because as you can see, there's quite a heavy mist down this morning. And then hopefully I make it to Mullingar and everything will be grand. Yeah, so the morning ended up with a pretty heavy mist and poor visibility, so it's probably good I was on the road relatively early and there was pretty much no traffic. I think I only saw 1 or 2 cars. The forgetting the cable is, you know, that's the problem with bikepacking, is you have probably 2 to 3 dozen components you need to bring with you. An awful lot of them are essential in different ways, and it's too easy to accidentally make a mess of one. If I was better organised, I'd have a proper checklist and check everything off as I put it in. On this occasion, I'd actually just picked up the wrong cable type and not realised it till I woke up at 6 in the morning and went to plug my phone in to recharge it. Fortunately, I am in the habit of putting in aeroplane mode overnight, which reduces battery consumption massively in combination with low power mode. But you are quite dependent on your phone these days for navigation, so whether or not I'd have actually managed to guess my way down the road into Mullingar and then down the canal to Dublin and then from Maynooth is anybody's guess. I might have. So I stopped at the shop here to see if they'd have a cable for sale. They didn't, but they very kindly gave me a charge, so I got a coffee and a couple of sausage rolls, and I'm now slightly better and I should at least make it to Mullingar. So a coffee, a couple of sausage rolls and a phone that was now a 30% charge set me back on the road, soon enough back on the canal itself and heading for Mullingar, again in the mist. And quite a few people out even at this quite early hour of the morning. The canal at Mullingar does quite a big long loop around it. You could instead cut through Mullingar itself. That's probably quite a good idea if you need to shop or pick up stuff, but the loop around it is also pleasant enough, and that's the way I decided to go on this occasion. Navigation on the Royal Canal is much simpler. You don't really need to have a map at all, because you can just follow the signposts that tell you whenever the track is flipping over from one side of the canal to the other. It does that quite a few times. The other thing that's quite useful on the Royal Canal is having a bell on your bike, because you do start to get larger and larger numbers of people using the canal for walking, and being able to warn them you're coming up from behind is useful, because even if there's enough space to pass them, you don't want to startle them as you go by. It's just not very pleasant, so I kind of ring the bell gently about 50 metres behind them so that they know I'm there. So made it to Mullingar, which is a big loop around Mullingar in fact. But yeah, this is all good. 61 kilometres to Maynooth, 29% phone charge, so I'm turning the phone into airplane mode. I'm just going to follow the canal down, and then I might need the last bit of charge to navigate back into Dublin from Maynooth. There's a little bit of that I'm not sure about, but I think that'll get me home. I've relatively little else to tell you about the Royal Canal route because the navigation is so straightforward on it. You're on the canal all the way, at least as far as Maynooth. There's not really any complications. Just do keep an eye on which side you're meant to be on. Sometimes there'll be a road on the other side, but if you follow it, you'll find out it turns off the canal after a few hundred metres. You want to stick to the signposted route. I actually did this previously in 2019 coming from Boyle. And back then it hadn't been as well developed. In fact, there was one section I actually couldn't get through at all, and I had one road diversion to do, and in other sections the surface hadn't been rolled and was really tough going to cycle through. But nowadays it's absolutely perfect all the way down. There are no problems whatsoever, maybe a little bit of potholes in a couple of sections, and it's the far easier of the two. I mean, you could, if you wanted to do an experimental bike packing trip, just simply come up the canal, the Royal Canal that is, from Maynooth, and then go back down again. But I kind of like doing the loop, and I would say that loop up the back of Lough Ennell is well worth it, both because it's nice in itself, but also it will give you some exposure to hills without being too ridiculous, and it's a short enough connection. It's about 35 kilometres between the two canals basically at that point. But with relatively little to say for this section, I'm going to give you some music again. So this time it's going to be Body of Water by Track Tribe. Both of these tracks are actually music that people upload to be used on YouTube videos. So I want to mention who does it so they get credit for it. And I'm experimenting with adding music to my videos after getting feedback from people who said they thought they'd be better. Let me know in the comments what you think yourself. as we're burning down the kilometres along the canal back towards Dublin, and the mist is now starting to lift and soon the sun will appear. And the next track I'm going to put on is Dreams of River Ganga by Hanu Dixit. I'll shift it upbeat for a few minutes with Cold Water by Patrick Patrikos. Next up we have Whispering Stream by E. Jammy Jams. This next song, Savannah Sunshine by Dan Hensig, is going to take us all the way into Maynooth. And then we're going to go a little bit beyond Maynooth, and you'll see that the track after Maynooth becomes a dirt track again. So that's a newly laid section since the last time I did this in 2019. From Maynooth to here, which is just the turn off at Leixlip station, is quite rough, but you can get through. However, if you're going to the city centre, it probably doesn't make sense to continue following it here because it doesn't connect through further down, and you can take the more direct route into town through the park. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to flip around and head down towards the Phoenix Park as an endpoint. It's very poor that they haven't yet completed the Royal Canal route all the way into the city centre. Hopefully that's going to happen in the next couple of years, but for the moment it leaves you with the usual situation of how the hell do you get in and out of Dublin without getting clobbered by traffic. It's quite hard. I think this route that I'm going to show you here is one of the better ways of doing it, and basically it's going to go into Leixlip and then into Lucan and then across the Liffey Bridge at Lucan onto the Strawberry Beds, down the Strawberry Beds, up Knockmaroon Hill into the Phoenix Park. And I'm going to end the route at the Phoenix Monument in the park because that's a good landmark. That's easy enough to get to if you're a tourist or anybody who doesn't know Dublin that well. So here we're going through St. Catherine's Park, entering at the Leixlip end of it, and that is running north of the Liffey, and then you come out pretty much at the Lucan end of the park, and that actually skips a really kind of nasty bit of a road in between the two. You know, as you then get in towards Lucan, tough gate there of course, as we then get in towards Lucan, this road here, there's a fair bit of traffic on it, but it's a lot slower moving than that earlier segment is, then Lucan itself just seems to have a permanent traffic jam, and particularly crossing the river, but you know, again, that's much less threatening to be cycling through than fast moving traffic on these narrow roads. Once you get across the bridge here and turn right, the traffic will get much lighter because generally everybody is going straight up that hill opposite. There is going to be a little bit behind you for this initial stretch of the road, but you know, generally they're used to cyclists on this road because it's one of the main routes into the centre, and then a lot of cars will be going left up the hill here, and then basically there's not that much traffic for the rest of it because they put speed bumps in every 100 metres. Very annoying speed bumps because they don't have a gap at the edge to allow bicycles through, so you will be going bumpity bumpity bump, but it's a final nice bit of travelling into the city, this time with the water alongside you being the Liffey, and onto the motorway we go. And it does have one nasty surprise, however, I'm afraid, and that's basically when you get to Knockmaroon Hill, because you're going to have quite a climb to get up to that top of that hill. And now we're back in the Phoenix Park and back in Dublin decidedly. If you've actually made it all the way through the video to here, make sure you follow the channel, like the video, and do all that other stuff that's meant to boost it. And do have a look at the rest of my videos. There's lots more bikepacking.